Originally, when it was sold, one of the reporters asked my husband his reason for selling. And he said, well, I think it was selfish. He said, I want the future generations to know that their great, 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 whatever homesteaded this. Yeah. And so it's just part of our heritage. Back in '95, my husband was diagnosed with colon cancer. And so he went through surgery and treatment. And all three daughters were now off to college. So there went our free help. And so one day the game warden was down visiting with my husband in the spring of the year. And they just asked how are things going and things. And so he said, well, I wish the state or the county would save this property. He said, I now have a cancer and I don't know what my outcome is going to be. So he went back and told Ellen Denzer. She was then in zoning. And so she called us up and she said, are you serious? And I said, yes, but we can't give it to you. It's my husband's 401k. Because he's a farmer. And she said, well, let me get back to you. So she got back and said, we're going to try for this. The state had told the county that they would help because of the quality of the lake and because they stocked it. Then two of the supervisors on the county board contacted us. Ron Raymond was the main contact. And he said, we have to convince the county board to vote to save this. And he said, we'll see what we can do. Well, it wasn't going too good. They weren't really all gung-ho for this. They had Glen Hills Park, and they said that was enough. So then Ellen Denzer got the grassroots people to start petitioning. And petitions came in from all over St. Croix County and probably some from outside the county. And they were pushing that they wanted to save Perch Lake. So they had a meeting with the public on what they would want done. And then they had a meeting with the whole town board when they were going to take a vote. And Ron Raymond had told us, he said, there's some that are holding out for no. And we found out later that they got contacted from Madison by the lieutenant governor to go ahead and buy the property. We will help you. But we didn't know this. So when Tom was my husband was so depressed at the time, he said, they'll never buy it. I'm not going to that meeting. It was a public meeting at the county board. They were going to do the final vote. And so it took me quite a while to convince him. And Linda and her husband at the time were holding seats for us in the county boardroom. Well, we got there, we couldn't get in the building. People were standing in the hall. And somebody was watching for us. And they parted people and came through and got us in there. And we found Linda and her husband, and she said, where in the heck have you been? And I said, trying to get your dad here. And so the vote came after much discussion, and they had people come up and speak. Your grassroots people came up and spoke to the county board. And one mother was holding her, I think it was about a 1.5-year-old girl, and she was holding a sign, Save Perch Lake. There was a farmer from down by Baldwin area, and he got up and spoke, and he said, I want my future generation, my grandchildren, their children, to know what it meant to have to homestead. It was not easy work. The place was packed. There wasn't even standing room. And so they took the vote, and there were only 2 against it. They also asked us at that time what we wanted it named. And we had always had our picnic grounds named Homestead Parklands. And so that's what we requested. A place for families, a nice place for families. Families were our main support all the while we had picnic grounds. We didn't charge for children under the age of 6, and then the children under the age of 6 decided they needed to pay, so they started giving us pennies because they wanted to pay also. And we always had repeat customers, so it was for the families, for children. And I think once they got going, they did a fabulous job. They had Bonastru and Pete Kling design, and it was quite a project. Everybody said, well, you sold too cheap. Well, we knew it was going to cost a lot to get a park developed. And it did. At the time the park opened, it cost $1.6 million. And so it's not cheap doing roads and that type of thing. I think they did an outstanding job in everything. And they continue to do, because they keep improving. First main one, I think, is over at the beach. On the lake side of the trail, there's a slight incline. And as human beings like to do, they like to cut corners. So they go down over it rather than around where it's not hilly. And that was starting to wash. So they now have that planted in prairie plants. They moved a memorial tree I had planted for the adopted son, Glenn. And that was a project. Moved the memorial tree so that they could put in a building for the rentals. That, where they moved the tree to, is a restoration project. And that will be enclosed and will have prairie plants. They are trying to reestablish the savanna and the prairie that was here at the time. This restoration here, they took all the pines down that were planted there, and they went down over a little bit. The pines are not native to this park. The website shows pictures of the hills around the lake back in the early 50s, and they're all bare. And Grandpa told my husband that's when, after the 30s, when it was so dry and then the rains really came, that's when all the gullies came. In the late 1920s, they came out from Stillwater and Bayport and wanted to lease that hill, the St. Croix Valley Ski Club. I don't know how much they paid Grandpa, but he said it's the most money the farm ever brought in. The hill did not have any trees on it like it does now. Those trees were planted in the early 1950s by my husband and his dad. They came down that hill, which was a 1,100-foot run with a 250-foot drop, and went across the ice. They had international ski meets here. They came from Switzerland and all over, and said Perch Lake Run was one of the best runs around. We have pictures of them in their enclosure they had, which was like a tent that they could cook their food in and a warming house, so to speak. They were all businessmen from either Stillwater, Hudson, and Bayport. There used to be generations down the road that would come and they'd stand out. They'd come in our gate down there, and they'd stand down there and they'd look at all those trees. And I'd walk down and I said, "Can you help me?" And they said, "Well, my grandpa said he used to ski here, but that can't be so." I said, "Yes, he did. Those trees weren't there then, of course." They plowed snow in Waldrop's farm up there and parked the cars. There were so many people here. This area up here was where he cropped, where Grandpa cropped. His hayland, his oats and corn, whatever he had. He used to call this the hellhole up here because it can get very hot. The road, the one-way road going down pretty much follows Grandpa's field trail, the road that he came up with wagon and horses. The plans for the Learning Center is something that the Friends of Perch Lake brought up. And we were pretty much advised that we'd have to raise private funds for that. The county had a drawing, an engineer's drawing of a type of learning center. They were having it include a receptive center where companies could have meetings and they would pay for a certain. But the raising of private funds for that learning center is very slow. And I have lots of things, and that's what the learning center is, my passion, because I will donate those items to the learning center so there would be like a small museum in there. I think the favorite item probably is well, there's two of them. As far as Grandma Davidson is concerned, the favorite item is her spinning wheel. I had a neighbor tell me that he knew Grandma when he was young, and he had a farm accident and he lost several fingers on one hand. So he asked her if she could knit him mittens that would accommodate his hand, and so she did. She knitted him. Yeah. Grandpa's, my favorite item is the ice saw. It's a very unique thing. We never did find he had a hand auger that started it. I do have his old-time hatchet that he chopped a hole in to start the ice saw to working. But also, I think his muzzleloader gun probably is another favorite of Grandpa's. They had, they shot rabbits and squirrels for meat, plus fishing. This is Grandma's 22. Grandpa went to the woods as a lumberjack in the wintertime, up to Hayward mostly. So he was gone most of the winter, so Grandma was there with the 4 daughters. Well, one died in infancy, 3 daughters and the adopted son. So she had to have protection. She had to have something to get squirrels and rabbits, because they're all around in the winter also. But Grandma also was a crack shot. And during the summer, from spring on, there were a couple of young people that thought it was really funny to come in with their lights off at night, drive up in front of the cabin, holler out, "You don't own the whole lake," and then they go back out again. Well, after several nights of getting woke up, Grandma was a little tired of this. So she sat out in front of the cabin on a chair in the dark with her loaded gun. Sure enough, here comes the car in the private road, no lights on. Makes the swing, hollers, "You don't own the whole lake." And as they turn to leave, she does 2 shots, and she takes out both of their taillights. So she goes in and tells Grandpa, she said, let them explain that to their dad. They didn't bother her anymore. This is the original wall, it's called a wall phone, battery operated, that Grandma and Grandpa Davidson used up until the time that they sold the property on Perch Lake to my late husband, Tom Syme, their grandson. This was a party line. There were either 10 or 12 parties on the line. So if you picked up, you might not get the operator, you might get somebody on your line talking. And so you had to hang up and wait until they were through talking. Or if it was an emergency, some of them would say, "I really need the line." And then they would hang up so you could call. But you just couldn't use the phone anytime you wanted to, because there may be somebody already on it. There were party lines for quite a while. But that was one thing too, the operator knew you personally. And if you were having a problem or if you were sick, you could pick up the phone and she'd say something over, you know, "Are you okay?" Yeah. We found her sewing machine in the granary and it was in bad shape. Badly rusted. Mice, of course, had made a home in it. The fellow that lives over the hills from me here, I asked him if he could clean it up and restore it somewhat. This is a Sears and Roebuck one. One drawer has a very big mouse hole in the back, and I told him not to repair it. The flour back then, and even when my girls were little, the flour always came in printed sacks, and they used that material to sew with. During the 30s, when it was so dry, the bay went dry. There was no water in the bay, and there's like a ridge, my mother-in-law told me. And she said the water couldn't get in from the lake, and the farmers around came down and asked Grandpa if he would cut a hole or a drain in that ridge so that the lake could come into the bay so they could water their cattle. And that he did. Grandpa was very protective of the lake, and I think that got passed down to my husband's. Charlie Ward, which was President of Brown and Bigelow, years and years back came out, and he had everybody that owned land in the bay talked into selling it to him. And he came out and wanted to buy this property from Grandpa. And Grandpa said, no one person should own this lake. I think somebody asked me one time what I thought my husband would think of the park. And I said, I think he'd be very pleased. He would have been very upset when they left it sit. And he was not one to be quiet about it, so it's probably just as well that he was removed from that part of it. It was very special to him. Yeah. And it is a unique piece of property on a very unique lake. Development would have ruined it. Yeah. It would have ruined the lake. That it's a special place on a special lake. I met a couple here yesterday when I was just sitting visiting with another gal, and they came in to walk the trails, and they had just discovered this. So in 100 years from now, there'll be people coming that are just discovering this. And it's, he said, do you realize what a gem this is? And I said, oh, yes. Yeah. I said, that's why it needed to be saved. The county had field trips before I was involved in it. And there were, I think the first year or two, I realized there were a lot of schools coming. And I said, I want to give the history of the park to the school children. I said, I would like to be one of the stations they come to. And so they said, okay, we'll try it and see if it works. Well, it took off like wildfire. They requested the history station before they requested anything. And I don't think people realized how much I had to bring down. And they can touch it, and they can feel it, and they can see it. And if I run out of time, they always tell me, they'll come up afterwards and say, you didn't tell us about this. They were interesting, and they kept everything, and their stories got passed down from generation to generation. One time, my husband's cousin that lived in White Bear Lake, you have to kind of know a little bit about her, first of all. She was one of those that when you told her something, she's already doing it before she's heard the whole story. So she calls up her grandpa and she said, I'm coming out, this is Gloria, do you need anything? And he said, yes, I've been fencing all day long and I sure could use 10 more post holes. So Gloria takes off, because that's her nature. And she has her hand on the hardware store door when it goes through her head what her grandpa said. 10 post holes. She was furious. She come out here and she's stomping out of the car and he's laughing. Because he knew her. And he knew she might even get to the store owner before she... That's the kind of guy he was. But they loved him. I had 3 daughters. They grew up here because we were here from the opening of the trout season on the first Saturday in May till just ahead of the snowstorm in the end of October. When they went off to college, I wrote to them and I said, you moved. And my one daughter wrote back and she said, really? But they grew up here and they loved it here. They could go fishing anytime they wanted to. They could go swimming anytime they wanted to. They could go canoeing anytime they wanted to, providing their chores were done. People from around, I've been told by people, would come down and cut ice out of Perch Lake. It's beautiful ice. The divers that went, one time when we were here, there were divers that went down under the ice with lights. And they showed me pictures, and it's beautiful blue, icy, very, very pretty ice. And well, then when they first came here, and they didn't have the water yet, they drank from the lake. Grandma said we stopped doing it when people started bringing horses down. She said, then I quit drinking from the lake. But it was, yeah, it was very pristine. It's known as one of the top 10 lakes in the state of Wisconsin by the DNR. When Grandpa and Grandma lived here, it was a one-room cabin. The cabin was where the post is at the end of the blacktop. Screened and glassed-in porches were added later. They were added on as a gift from their children. Well, the homestead grant for government lots 1 and 2 is 1890. He married Aggie A. Chapman in 1895 and received the homestead grant in 1897. Grant was signed by the then president, William McKinley. In his next term of office, he was assassinated. Well, I hope it keeps getting respected as much as it is. I keep telling the children that come for field trips that the Davidson and Syme family were stewards of the property and the water for 106 years, so please take care of it. But I just wanted everyone to realize that two families grew up here. And it wasn't just some piece of property that the county found and made a park. I just wanted them to remember. And I just feel if kids know about it and know that St. Croix County is technically them, so it's their property, so please respect it. This land was owned by the federal government. It was privately owned by the Davidson and Syme family for 106 years. And now the county owns it. This is the homestead grant that was given to my husband's grandfather in 1897 when he proved that he could make a living, although it would be kind of strange living. This is signed by President McKinley. His next term of office, he was assassinated, so he never completed that office. I gave a copy of this, a digital copy of this went to the county. This is the original and it will stay in our family. Grandpa had proved that he could make a living, and they gave him the land. It was a lot of work for the free land. Yeah, it was a lot of work. He drove a point down, because I said this is spring fed. He drove a point down and got hit into a spring, and it was the most beautiful drinking water you'd ever want to drink. People from the cities used to bring jugs out and take jugs and jugs back home with them. The county tried to save that well, but it wouldn't recover fast enough for the public to be using it. And so they had to drill a new one and cap that one. So now this park, technically, because you live in St. Croix County, is yours. Take good care of it. I think Grandpa would be delighted with what's here.